recording this meeting. And
Okay.
we're off.
And we're off to the races. So the main thing to remember is that we're focused around your core type and what your core type means. So the core type 1, the basic idea is that we all, when we're younger, we feel like we're not getting attention, we feel like we're not worthwhile, and we create a logic in our head, a belief in our head that if we do this thing, then we will be okay. You know, if we come up with a compensation strategy. So your core strategy was to believe that you weren't getting the attention because somehow you were bad or defective or something like that. And so the compensation strategy for that is then let me show everyone that I'm good, that I'm full of integrity, that I can do things perfectly. And act out of this idea of idealism, like I can be the ideal kid, the ideal Bradley, the ideal whatever. And so that's the compensation strategy. But the unfortunate thing about the strategy is the more that you do this, you know, like it does feed into feeling less like that's who you are as well, because you're constantly trying to do these things and engage in these behaviors. It's a constant reminder of like, but you weren't in the past, and that creates pain. The fact that you're 83 and not above an 85, it tells me that it's a healthy attachment to this. Okay. Where, yes, under a lot of stress, you will go to those rhythms, but you know, most of the time you don't. And so what that means is that, you know, your core type being this idea of I am a perfectionist and idealist, integrity is important. At your best, it's things like being principled, fair, ethical, self-disciplined, you know, all that kind of stuff. You do a lot of work because the work shows you to be right, to be full of integrity, to be all those things that you valued in the past, because that's the way that you figured to get that attention, that energy, okay, to show yourself to be valuable. Yeah. But
it's interesting.
The flip, yeah, go on.
Well, it's interesting that this is the story. Like does it have to come from a negative perspective? Because it really makes a lot of sense to me. Like I did this as a coping mechanism,
Yes.
perhaps because I was adopted and I was given up and I was given away. And
right,
maybe the risk was I was don't want to be given away again or whatever. But does it have to be a story of like a coping mechanism? Is that what it is? That the foundation of all types?
Yes, it is the foundation of all types, and doesn't have to be a coping mechanism. It's just because it's a child's coping mechanism that you then practice for 20 years. So to say that you're going to like not engage in that neurologically now is difficult as hell. And ultimately, it's very difficult also for ones, because in doing all these things as well, ones will look at fixing and people or things in their environment, because they're driven by this ideology of being good, and therefore what is good and what is not good. What is not good in two ways: because it's bad or because it's wrong. Like it's badly done, it's poorly done, it needs to be fixed, or it's wrong, it needs to be fought again. Okay. And what we do is then, yes, we have that original compensation strategy, but then we build identity around it as well. So, you know, that the thing is that becoming aware of when you're acting out of this based on instinct versus acting out of this based on desire, you know. So this is the coaching kind of like community talks about this all the time, about like a conditioned value versus a chosen value. Like, do I have responsibility as a value because it was conditioned into me as a child, because my parents were not responsible and therefore I developed responsibility, awareness around responsibility, you know, a value around responsibility? Or do I choose responsibility because I think that responsibility is a beautiful thing? So the question is not, does it exist? The question is, how do you relate to it? Okay. Yeah. And so, you know, the thing is looking at your graph as a whole, and I'll get to the whole later. Looking at your graph as a whole, you have healthy relationships with all of these beliefs. The one that causes you problems is going to be actually the 4 and the movement away from the 6. The avoidance of the 6 can cause you problems as well. But we'll talk all about that.
Can you zoom your screen view out a little bit so I can see more of the chart, including the numbers across the bottom? Yeah, and
let me just make this.
yeah. There we go.
Maybe a little bit more this way as well.
Nice. Is this built right into the software that it's on, that you see the results on? You just see my profile?
Well, this is Notion. So I just embedded the PDF in Notion.
Oh, okay.
So yeah. So there we go. That's more or less what we need to see.
Yeah.
The types at the bottom. Yeah, the numbers at the top and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. You happy with that?
Yep.
Okay, so let me move this motherfucker. Just move. No, stop trying to. Hang on. There we go. Okay.
Hey.
All right. So the core type, the core wounding, how much does that make sense? And do you relate to that?
Yes.
Okay.
For sure. I think I said I was adopted as like a thing that I think would drive me to create that early on.
Right.
Or just feeling kind of like, I don't know. I guess I have a special type of responsibility that's different from so many other people. I feel like it would also drive that.
100%. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Especially because I was thinking about mine, and one of the biggest things is what I was told, because a 5 seeks to know or understand something in order to be safe, because the defect is that I didn't know, and therefore I'm bad. Because I didn't know. And the amount of time,
or you were vulnerable if you didn't know.
Right, exactly. I was shouted at so many times for doing things that I thought were okay, and then I got in trouble because clearly it was a mistake. Don't you know that this is wrong? And I'm like, I had no idea that what I was doing was bad. You know, I wasn't sensitive to that being bad, but I was like told I was stupid for not knowing this or whatever from my parents, you know, because my dad was a perfectionist. So of course, when he saw me being imperfect and he corrected me in those kinds of ways, which then developed this out of me, you know, because that's what I paid attention to. So it's very interesting to then consider why you developed your type 1. So like you say, maybe the adoption is something to do with it. Like, oh, somehow I am, you know, defective in a sense, or, you know, and therefore I don't want to be that. I want to be a good little boy in order to deserve and earn this love. So one of the biggest things is that just working on the core type alone and that core inner critic, and getting to this point of like what happened to you has got absolutely nothing to do with you. It's got everything to do with the people that were around you at the time, your mom, your dad, your parents, whatever it is.
Sure.
And detaching yourself from this idea that I am not good and I need to do good in order to show or prove to myself and to others that I am good.
Fair.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's fair.
And if we detach that and say, you are already good, and no strategy that you implemented in the past had anything to do with what happened, you know? So, you know, it all comes back to humans trying to make sense of the world and trying to control their world. So the interesting points about what we're talking about here with regard to you, as well as the type 1, has got to do with this idea that 1s will internalize their world first and then externalize. So I want you to remember this. As a 1, if something goes wrong, you get angry, but you don't get angry like externally, it gets internalized as anger.
Yeah.
And that could look passive aggressive as well. So when we talk about relationships and communication with Tara, for example, like this might be something that could come up, is like a more passive aggressive nature. Okay.
Oh, I've felt that. That's easy to feel.
Right.
Especially if somebody's more apt to respond outwardly first, right? Because there's the other way that you could do it is basically what you said. You can internalize it or you can externalize it. And
Right.
if my bias is what you're saying, to internalize it, that relates to me and I can feel that. And then if somebody else that I'm in relationship with were to more externalize it, that's kind of intimidating to me because I can't always relate. I don't always
Right.
relate very well because I need my own space to like figure it out, I guess, first before I take action on it. But I usually
And this
take
is
action quite well after I do that.
100%. And you're actually getting into a lot of the interactions as well that are here that we see in your graph. So for example, figuring stuff out is going to be your 5, 77, right? But what's interesting, just quickly to finish up on the 1, is to talk about this idea of internalizing it. And because 1s are perfectionistic, you tend to judge or criticize, but inwardly to yourself, you will criticize people, but that doesn't necessarily change how you interact with them, or you'll judge them and be like, they're not doing that right. Criticize like, oh, that form is wrong or something like that. But this is again, when you are at the worst parts of yourself, lacking energy, low levels of energy, irritability, things like that. Okay, so we see that, and we'll see that flip side come out at a few times, but you use a lot of good strategies here. If we look at your graph is either situational or positive, which shows me that you've got a lot of tools in your tool belt. And so it all comes back to this 1. So moving on very quickly, because I don't want to take up hours of your time again. So I just want to hit on what makes sense and do like a more high level overview of it. So the 2 score is the helper. And the 2 score is really about the perception of being helpful, right? And so again, this idea of I want to do what is right, and so I will help people because that is what is the right thing to do. But also by being perceived as a helpful person, it helps me to feel like I am full of integrity and I am a good boy.
Yeah.
And so the helping kind of connection there. Now, what this means as well is that 1, being the fixers, being the type that makes judgments about seeing what's right in terms of ethical right, or right as in terms of correct, it's well done. When you help people to fix what is wrong. And sometimes this also means that you could also help people who didn't necessarily want help in those ways. But because you're a 1, you're like, but I see that this is wrong, so let me come in and help you. So at your best, this means that you are such a giving, kind, compassionate, caring person. All of those things that come along with helping. But remember that all of that helping as well feeds that core need. So at your worst, that core need is going to come out and be like, I know better than you where you need help, right? Because of the judgments and the criticism that comes out of the 1, the negative side of the 1 as well. So that's what I was going to say. So you find it fascinating.
Yeah, there's definitely a connection there that I can see between that and how it would express itself in life, and how when it was kind of unwanted help, it would be perceived differently or more as like a judgment or like a criticism of someone's character, or bit like it would, like if they've got values that are like they've got too much pride in themselves and I just come in and try to help, or I tell them what's wrong, or it makes it harder for the 1 in times when there's more stress there and you can't actually express yourself through being able to help. So
and so this is 100% on the money, because what normally happens with 2s is that at their worst, because they're so orientated around helping others and they need to help others, they tend to lose themselves in helping others, which means number 1, they actually overextend themselves. They can't say no to other people because they need to be able to help people. But then number 2 is that they tend to have low self-esteem as they lose themselves in the identity of others. This is not something that you necessarily fall victim to because you're not a core type 2, you're a core type 1. You take on the helping tendency.
I can relate to that though.
Without a doubt. I don't doubt that you relate to that, but obviously it's not something that you fall into on a regular basis, because ones will recognize, for example, like low self-esteem. I think we can all kind of connect with it. And the low self-esteem for you is not necessarily that you don't exist, because helping people is how you build your esteem. As a one, your esteem comes from the idea of like, I'm doing what is right. And when people don't want your help, it frustrates you because you can't help them to do what is right, which might
Yeah.
pull your esteem down.
Hmm.
So remember that it always feeds back to the core type. Does it make sense?
Yeah.
How much does that hit?
I like how this is building a story based on the interrelationship of these, and the arrows that you're showing on the screen are helpful as you talk about them.
Wicked. Good. Yeah, so like I say, I feel like it's a different reading today because I feel like I understand it so much deeper now as well. And so,
Mhm.
this is only the first two types, but already just on these two types, we can see your predominant behaviors as well. So a quick one for you is that the core type 2, when they start getting like unraveled, they will start to become aggressive and dominant and play manipulation games of like creating issues in order to solve the problems to be helpful, right?
Mm.
Um,
Oh man,
so
that's not fun.
no, it's not. And the thing is that that's very different from ones, where ones will try and fix everything. And so, ones are the people who have like OCD. Ones are the people who organize everything 15 times. If you go into Lori's cupboard as a one, things are organized according to category, then color.
Yeah.
Whereas I used to think that I had OCD because I'm a 5, but actually my OCD doesn't exist in that way. My OCD exists in terms of like, I need to organize, structure this information, but my cupboard can look like a mess because I know more or less where things are, and it doesn't bug me that things aren't exactly in place.
Yeah.
But I understand the flow of the cupboard, and so anytime I step in, it doesn't matter if it's clean or dirty, I know where things are.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the 5s then. So the 5s are knowledge, understanding, because of the idea of like, if I don't understand something, I'm going to get in trouble, I'm not going to be good or whatever. And only by understanding something can I show others that I'm worthy of attention. Okay. So research is a big deal here. Being analytical and thinking and in structuring knowledge is a big deal. But being, like I said, seeing the behavior out of that is about researching, about sitting and making sense of things. And so there's two ways that this works. Is number one is by making sense of things, you again feed into this idea of like, I'm doing the right thing, right? So you understand your ethics through research. You understand doing things well by researching them, right? So how do I do things well? Well, let me research how I do things well. And again, by engaging this behavior as well, in order to be a good boy, you see the point. Well, let me do some research so that I know that I can do this well, or I can figure out what is like really ethical or ideal in the situation, and therefore I can be a good boy. So they interrelate together. I research in order to be a good boy, or I want to be a good boy, so let me research. Does that make sense?
Mm. Yeah. Generally, I think it makes sense. I guess in a lot of cases, I wonder which one of these. If a one is a core type, what are the other core types? Can any of these be a core type for somebody to operate from? In the sense that I'm a one, you're a 5. Are all
Yeah.
these possibilities?
So you're a core type 1, which means your core wound is this. But you've got an elevation in your 5, which means you behave in these ways in
Mhm.
order to fill the core wound,
Yeah.
right? Now, for me, I'm a core type 5, which means my wound was around this idea of like, I just didn't know. And so everything that I do is a way to kind of like find what I need in order to do this.
Mm.
So one of the core needs, and we'll bring this up later, the core need for the core type 1 is about control, right? So you have a need, if I'm not mistaken, you have a need for control. All right, and you get control over your internal world by doing the right thing. You have shown your control. Okay, whereas 5s, they don't seek control; they seek security, safety, and they do this by knowing and understanding how things flow. They feel much more secure to just let things flow. Right. So you don't necessarily feel that need for security like a 5 does. You will feel the need to control what's going on inside of yourself more. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So how much does that land for you with, how much does that answer your question, rather, is a better way to say it?
I think it did. Well, I'm just interested, I guess, then thinking about the differences in these other core types and how they would perceive things. So my mind went more macro in context of the whole thing.
Dude,
and
yeah, you should do the training. The training's fucking awesome.
I was
Yeah,
like,
it's epic.
there's a lot of interesting perspectives one could take with the awareness of these different elements. So
100%.
I kind of got
100%.
lost in the big picture. I blasted off into space for a second.
That's cool. That's the 5 in you, clearly. Yeah. But this is the thing, is what's interesting as well is that in order to help others better, you'll probably do some research and you'll feel much more competent in helping others because you've done research as well. And, you know, again, this research is now cascading in like, I do the right thing. Well, how do you do the right thing? Well, by helping people. Well, how do I help people? Well, let me help people to do the right thing by
Let me
doing
help you
more
help more
research.
people. Helping people
And
help people.
exactly. And coaching. And, you know, it's the idea that doing more research helps you to be more confident that you're doing the right thing and you're helping people to be better, right? So your research is to then fix people better so that you can feel better about being a core type 1. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Now, the other negative side of a 5 is that 5s tend to, under stress, will isolate and will go into depression very, very easily, right? So when there's a breakdown here, for example, if you are irritated, irritable, stressful, things like that, and things fall apart, the likelihood for you to go there, because first of all, we go to your core type 1, negative, judging yourself, judging others, maybe pushing and being a little bit more high energy, very intense, trying to fix others. And when that doesn't work, isolating and going to depression. So when people reject your help, where do you find yourself going?
It definitely causes like a glitch in my system, in a sense where it like throws me off sometimes if somebody rejects me, and it just doesn't seem logical. Like I'd have no problem like helping, right? And
right. Yeah.
if it's not welcomed, then
like what the hell?
I guess I would go to my own negative place around it, whatever else I was associating with anything else around me in the situation, and how I was building the relationship, or what like the expectation was from me or from them on anything else. You know? So I don't know, I would probably start to analyze the relationship more and what it meant to me, and I would probably, and
there you go.
Could,
right. So
and if I didn't,
that breakdown,
I don't know. I probably wouldn't.
The isolation that you're talking about right there is what I'm talking about, when you try to like step back and analyze. That's what 5s do.
Yeah.
That's exactly it. Yeah.
And I haven't always been comfortable in that place. I don't think I'm more comfortable today in stepping back and actually feeling more responsible for myself, and not just making rash decisions or not just ignoring something, and then it just becomes a bigger problem than it would have been if I would have originally taken care of it.
Yep. Well, this is where we come
but
to.
then as the perfectionist, I wonder
Yeah.
then how much of it do I have to take care of? How much of it is my responsibility anyways? And I can take on, I think, a lot of responsibility for myself internally, and
Mhm.
that can lead to some frustrations. That's probably where I would go. If someone rejected me enough and it was so meaningful to me, I would just bring it back upon myself, and I would be like, well, I guess I'm not good enough then to even help.
Yeah. And there's the there's the one, that judgment, that criticism coming back on oneself there.
Yeah.
That's a big deal. Yeah. I guess I'm not good enough. That type of language of being like, I'm not good enough in
Because
order
I
to
don't want
help them.
I don't want anybody to ever, I don't want to ever make anybody feel like they're not good enough. If I already
Right.
don't feel good enough, why would I don't want anybody else to feel not good enough.
Right. Because that's not right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that's where we come into your core type, like to say that's not right. Whereas, like, to be honest with you, like me as my core type, I'm like, ethics don't exist, morals don't exist. Like, it's all bullshit. So like when Lori talks about like, it's not right to do this, I'm like, consider me morally dead. Like, I have no morals. And she's like, what the fuck are you talking about? I'm like, everything for me is about acceptable versus unacceptable. And like, we're talking about like a naked ape, the human ape, and biologically what we have inside us. And so like to say that a person does this and it's not right, for me, I wouldn't say that that's an idealism or a moralism kind of thing to do, but rather to say more like, oh, it's just not good practice because you're not doing yourself any favors,
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. But so I think the way that you worded it perfectly pointed out, confirmed absolutely 100% your core type and how your core type responds to things, which is interesting. So yeah. So moving this a little bit along as well is the idea of the 7. Now the 7 is quite interesting, very social, enthusiastic, a problem solver, but the way that they think about problems, remember that 7 is inside the thinking and processing group. The way that they think about problems is that they will do trial and error. Let's experiment. Let's like physically do something. So that's quite interesting because obviously the 5 is relating back to doing research. The 7 would then say, let's do a test of that research, right? Which obviously then will then feed into, oh, I did the research and I know how to put this into action, which means that I'm right. I'm better now. I can do this very well. And I want to be a good boy, and I found that this is a good way to do it, is to do testing, trial and error work. So that two-way street exists there as well. Does that make sense?
Yeah. How does that relate to relationships and emotions?
It's interesting that you say this because I wanted to talk about emotions separately and emotional responses. So very easy way to think about it is that type 1s generally will stuff their emotions down deep inside to just get the job done. I'm not doing the right thing, but I don't feel good about it. Shut the fuck up. Let's just do the right thing. So do the right thing is capitalized with the verb to do, not to feel. To do the right thing. So there's a lot of like, let's put our actions aside in order to prioritize finishing the task. Let's put our feelings aside, right? Whereas, the 2s won't look at negative emotions. They are positive spinners. It's okay. At least we got this. Look at the silver lining. So again, 2s don't look at negative feelings, right? 5s put their feelings aside in order to accomplish the task. All right. 7s, any guesses? What do 7s do?
They do. They think positively, optimistically?
100%. 100%. So it's, again, we see the 2 coming out of you here as well in the 7 of let's do the positive spinning, let's look at the good stuff, things like that. So any adventurous enthusiast will always have a positive outlook on what they're about to do, right? Rather than panic about it. So what this means is that right now you're going to be a very positive person, right? And you're going to be a person who decides to take action, which means it's very rare to see people who negatively react emotionally, which stops them from taking action. So for you, figuring them out is a little bit more difficult, because especially if you run out of patience with people and they're responding in this way where they're reacting to something negatively and it stops them from taking action. You're like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, okay, I'm going to help you because it's the right thing for me to do. But internally, there might be some judgments and some criticism going on. I'm like, what the fuck is going on with this person? They really need a lot of help, you know?
Yeah.
How does that land?
How does that relate to tasking, goals, and leadership? Like, that seems like it could create some challenges if it wasn't.
If we're not talking about your graph and we're talking about other people's graphs, the 8 will call people out and say, shut the fuck up, you need to get control of yourself. But if a person has a 9 that's pretty good, it means that they will actually say that in a very polite way. Okay. But if we see that like the tasking, goals, and leadership scores are low, you know, then, you know, people generally won't necessarily get much accomplished, but they might feel what others are feeling as well and understand like, oh, I get it. But remember that there's 3 ways to respond to something. Number 1 is put your emotions aside. Number 2 is positive spin. And number 3 is just react. And this is quite rare for a 1 to have such a high 4 score. So previously we discussed this as being situational. And you said, actually, I engage in this behavior quite frequently. And so that explains a lot. You know, even though point-wise is considered, your 4th score is considered situational, it actually is very elevated, which means that when you are not stressed, you do feel. But when you are stressed, you might not feel. You know? And so feeling your feelings in your 4ness, you know, when you're stressed, this could present itself as like an eventual moodiness to you, where you'll flip-flop your moods. Or, you know, 4th, which experience those negative emotions, might encounter despair as well. A form of hopelessness, of just like, oh my God, what is going on? There's just this cascade of negative emotions they can't deal with. You know, and they don't want to deal with it. They want to feel it all and let it wash over them like the ocean. 4th, the point of living is to feel all of these special feelings that come from interacting with the environment. You know, which
How would
makes
you characterize the best of a 4?
Incredibly artistic, passionate. They're very creative. They've got a very strong internal world going on as well. And, you know, 4s take everything internally. So again, like I said, they react to things, but that means that they're highly empathetic as well, right? So they feel much more than anyone else feels. So they understand feelings of others too. So, you know, in their best aspect, they're really engaged with the heart, without a doubt. And the heart's coupled together with, you know, passion and socializing and being more, you know, rooted in what makes them different and special. But the flip side of that is then going to be the moodiness, the selfishness, being self-absorbed, like my feelings matter more than others. Other people don't even know their feelings or don't experience their feelings quite as much as I do. And in relationship, this can mean that, you know, 4s are incredibly romantic, incredibly sensual and intimate. But on the flip side, in relationships, 4s can be selfish, self-absorbed. But then the second one is that they always doubt that people can truly understand them because they're so different. They feel so differently from others. So they don't necessarily trust that someone can truly understand them. And because of that, they're always seeking that intimacy with a partner. Okay. So this is something that we will touch on in a bit, actually. The idea is that that high 4 score can land you in trouble with that, where ones are always looking to fix. So looking at how that comes out as a form of service with your relationship with Tara, not necessarily all the time, but maybe, like in ways where you're stressed out or something like that, or you're uncomfortable, you might try to fix her as a means of dealing with the relationship. But what that means is that you're also always going to be shopping around for a more perfect fit in your mind, or wondering, and again, the 4s do this as well, is there someone out there who can better understand me or better process my feelings? And so, having that conversation about with you here before we get into like the group one next time, about what ideal partners look like, for you. And I need to have this conversation with you and not necessarily with Tara, because Tara's one, her scores and her things don't necessarily predispose her to that. Whereas for you, you might be predisposed to that under stress. So like when you fight, do you find these thoughts coming up?
Yeah.
Totally.
Oh, I would happily be honest with her too, and cultivate that conversation. And if something like that came up in a conversation, we would definitely be able to handle it anyways. So I'm confident in that.
Which is amazing. That's great.
And it wouldn't necessarily have to be something we have to talk about with you, but just as an awareness, as a couple, right, we can consider it and we can talk about it at our own rate. So it's cool to just have the perspective of that's a thing, a bias of the way that these all work together. It creates it. So
100%. And this is the thing that I said to her at the beginning. If there is anything explicitly that you do not want me discussing with her, let me know. Okay, but I'm going to assume that whatever we discuss, you're comfortable discussing with her as well. Okay.
Yeah, I'll show her the recording here. Hi, Tara.
Okay. Okay, so the next score that's interesting is that your 8, right? Your 8 is there. And your 8 score, 8 are the leaders. So 8s are incredibly pragmatic, very action focused. They are very honorable and they're very caring. They tend to take care of their group, and again, they tend to be more assertive. They see it as like being direct will help everyone. So I would say that your 8 score helps you to be a good boy, because by taking charge and being a leader, you're able to do what is right. Okay. And likewise, in order to do what is right in your eyes, taking these actions of being honorable, taking charge, being assertive, telling people what they need to hear, what that suggests, by the way, and I'm telling you all of this, I'm trying to make it more balanced, but understand one thing: your graph is not balanced. Your graph suggests that you are incredibly capable of achieving anything you want to achieve. What your graph suggests is a very strong individual with a lot of qualities that you utilize like very well. Okay.
Totally.
And yeah, and it's a great graph. And again, the weakness of the 1 being so task focused, but your 4 being so high suggests that, if you look at all your numbers, it's like 5 points between your strongest and your weakest numbers. In terms of your tasking, goals, relation, and leadership is 75. Your relationship emotion is 73. Your thinking processing is 70. That tells me that you're very well balanced as an individual, and all of the well balanced elements are pretty elevated, which tells me that it's healthy. So when I tell you like the positives and the negatives, I'm also just trying to bring some insight into things and trying to give it a little bit more balance, even though the report should just be just telling you how amazing you are.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I think I wonder, what is, you talked about the balance of those. What is there, like you have a line across there at 70.5. Is there kind of like, what's the meaning of like the is there a baseline? How is it structured? I guess that's
So
they
70 is your
relate.
baseline because your highest score is 83 and your lowest score is 58.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So it adds up all of those scores and gives us a median, which is going to be the 70.5.
Hmm.
Okay. Which tells us how often you engage in scores that are above and how frequently you avoid the scores that are below as well.
Mm. Mm.
So that's the 70.5. So don't think that higher is better or lower is better or anything like that. Because let's say you engaged your one more and it went up to 85, that's considered unhealthy attachment.
Gotcha.
So I imagine that your baseline was 80, okay? And everything was sitting at that line of 80,
Yeah.
okay? Like, sure, it means that you've got like a lot of tools in your tool belt as well, but it also means that you have no preferences or no personality necessarily one way or the other. You just do whatever you want to do whenever the hell you want to do it, and nothing of it really matters to you. That's not always a great thing. So looking at it from that perspective, it's
But
just
if you
this
were doing
idea
it
of
perfectly, it wouldn't matter.
and that's the frustrating thing. There is no perfect, unfortunately, you know. But there is just different people. So
Absolutely.
I think I've asked this
Subjective.
question a lot of times to people, but consider this. Your graph is going to change, not necessarily the core type, but all of the other types are going to change depending on your situation. So let's say you have a bad experience helping people, you might drop your 2 down low and see that helping people was not the right way to go about showing people that you are a good person. You know, something backfires for you that usually works. You'll go out of that. So you might take some time to recover from that, and when you do recover, you might not engage that too as much anymore. So all of the scores, except for your core type, will move up and down depending on your environmental, whims. And so this is a great score and a great thing now, but it doesn't always stay and remain great. If you go through hardships, you might find yourself engaging more or less of one behavior more than another. So like the one to talk about is your 6 score, obviously being depressed. There's probably a very strong reason for that.
Can you help?
And
Hold
the
on one
idea is
second,
that,
Justin.
yeah,
Can you hold one
go.
second?
Yeah.
All right. They're doing some solar on the house today, and they got to shut all the power off so they can connect the solar to the house.
Okay.
They got
So what do you
all
want to do?
mounted. So let's go for like another 10 minutes or so.
Okay. All right. So let me just push a couple of quick things out here then. Like I said, the 4 score being high means that you feel your feelings a lot, which is good, that internal world, but it also means that you're constantly looking for intimacy. Okay. The situational 3, the situational 9, these are all fine. There's no problem there. It just means you engage in these behaviors when it suits you or not, like you have no attachments there. The 6, it's got to do with trust, right? It's got to do with planning for crisis. So although you're a 1 and you plan a lot and you do things well, the 6s are preoccupied and paranoid that things will go wrong. And 6s typically will then, as a way of finding security, will connect with authorities or groups that will give them that security that they need. And somewhere along the line, you found there's trauma around this, or you found that this was absolutely a bad way to go about doing the right thing. So it suggests that you don't necessarily feel a lot of trust in a team, but rather that you prefer to do things on your own. Maybe because a team burned you, or an authority, an organization burned you in the past,
Mm.
And you realize that that was the wrong way to do things, the wrong way to get that done. It also suggests that you more will go with an event. You will plan for something, but you won't excessively focus on like what can go wrong, which makes sense considering how much positive spinning you do as well.
Mm.
So in terms of people who need security, you're not the person to speak to, because you'll be like, come on, what could go wrong? Don't worry about it. It's fine. Let's go. And the security focused people might be more like, but what if it does? You know, where sixes will be like, well, if it does, I've got 15 backup plans, you know, that kind of shit.
Mm.
So that's quite interesting to see that. So how much does that land for you?
Totally. I can see that. There's uh, perhaps a loose attachment is what it sounds like to that.
Oh, no, you avoid that. You don't go near trusting groups in order to do the right thing. And
Yeah.
then with your planning as well, you'll plan, but you won't focus on any risks or trying to mitigate risks and like getting into details of like risk mitigation. You're like, no, it's fine. If there's a risk that comes up, you're very confident in being able to deal with it. So that's what it means. You
Yeah.
avoid outsourcing trust and security because you prefer to depend on yourself, number one. And then
Yeah.
number two is like you're not going to be anxiously looking for security by planning for problems that might come. How does that land?
Yeah, totally. I guess
Okay.
I'm not, I mean, I try to plan for success. I don't plan for problems. Is that what you're saying? I'm like more focused on being perfect and helping and outward expression of that maybe the inward or the consequential analysis is not as important to me.
100%. Yeah. Yeah. And so this could mean that also an 8 is a risk taker. Okay. So your 8 score there says that you're more likely, your 7 and your 8 score, 7s are adventurous. They'll be like, let's go, let's fucking do it. 8s are bring the challenge. Let me show you how much control I can exert over things, right?
Mm.
So 7s and 8s need to be reined in a little bit because they can be excessive risk takers. Now, the fact that you're a 1 with a 2 and a 5 says that this risk-taking behavior is not something that you engage in to the same degree. Because to
No.
do the right thing, you want to make sure that you're helping people, and you'll be sensitive to what people are saying is risky versus not risky. You know, so the relationship between those is interesting. The relationship between your 8 and your 9 is interesting as well, because 8s will be incredibly direct, 9s will be very soft and very much like an 8 with a 9 that's connected. The 8 is the gas, the 9 is the brake. And so 8s will tell you, and if you cry, that's your problem, but they'll tell you directly. A 9 will softly tell you, trying not to create conflict. So the interesting thing is your 9 is situational, and your 8 is not necessarily a high score, and it's not one of your highest as well, which suggests you're more likely to help people, but you might be direct with them, but you'll still try and help them, and you'll try and be direct with them, but like in the right way, you know.
Fair.
And what does that look like? And so you've probably got some trial and error around that of what you found to be the best way to give people feedback as well, you know, to be direct with them.
Love it.
So like I said, it's a very healthy graph. It shows you're very capable and competent. And so the biggest concern, so to speak, that we can talk about is to ask some big questions. And perhaps we can get off this and just do a phone call quickly. That would be good, for questions that we could then think about for next time, for when we do the group with Tara, is to ask the questions around, you know, in what situations do you find yourself totally ignoring your feelings, putting them aside in order to do the job? In what situations do you find yourself actually positive spinning? And in what situations do you find yourself emotionally reacting? Because the two that I said, the reacting, so far we've got 2 of your scores are shoving your emotions aside. 2 of your scores are about feeling the positive vibe. And the 8 and the 4s are reactionary numbers. An 8 will react usually with violence, with aggression, very rageful, okay, under stress. And a 4 will do the same thing, but inwardly. Okay. They will react emotionally and internally. They'll just feel a lot and just have to process those feelings and just feel those feelings.
Yeah.
Both of those numbers, all of it suggests that you are fast to take action, right? And then after you've taken action is an idea when you start to see the good stuff. And after all of that is when you start to process the negatives. So the 8 score, reflecting the idea of like expressing control and being rageful, is not something that you would go to. I would see that you wouldn't actually do that because you would see it as the wrong way to respond. So you wouldn't do that. But let's say 8s typically are ashamed of when they act way too rageful, when they spiral down and they try and take control by influencing people with their strength of their negative emotions like anger. They're incredibly shameful. So I'd ask you, how many times have you actually like lost your shit and told people what to do and where to go and whatever, and been that 8, that dominant kind of personality, that 8, and then afterwards you felt incredibly ashamed of your behavior?
It's an interesting question.
Okay.
It'd be hard to find a time like that in my mind.
And that's what I say. I don't think it's going to be typical for you, because I think that you've got so many different ways of managing that emotion. Your 1 would say this is not the right thing to do. Your 2 would say this is not helping people. Your 5 would be like, you know, this is absolutely not the right thing to do in terms of like the research says that this is all going to create problems, you know?
Yeah.
You know, so I think you manage a lot of the negative aspects of each of these signs and each of these numbers. You manage a lot of the negative aspects with the other ones, which is why I say this is a very healthy graph, a very intimidating graph in that perspective as well.
Oh, cool. Shucks. Thanks.
Shucks. Oh, shucks.
Oh, shucks.
Shucks. So it's interesting. Ones being so high like that. You know, there's always an opposition. Like I said, 8s and 9s are usually in opposition. 3s and 4s are usually in opposition as well. A 5 and a 4 sometimes can be in opposition. A 6 and a 1 is not surprising to see in opposition, because a 6 is like, you know, if you are a low 6, it means you don't trust others. Well, why don't you trust others? Because you don't trust others to do something well, to do the right thing. You trust yourself to do the right thing. So it's very typical to see a high 1 with a low 6. Very typical. So yeah.
What is it typical of a high 6 to have a relationship with?
A low 4. So a high 6 is usually like, I will give my loyalty and all of my dedication and support. So 6s can be incredibly loyal. They're hardworking, disciplined, all those types of things, because they seek security. And in exchange for their security, they give everything, their dedication, their loyalty, and they work for it as well. But in that, they lose themselves. So you'll see a low 4 score there. Why? Because they're not even aware of what they're feeling half the time. You
Gotcha.
know? They don't care about feeling it, because they just want to feel secure.
So my high 2 kind of relegates that low 4, which pushes the 6 lower for me.
Say that again. Your high 2.
Well, because I have a higher 2 and I have more being a helper, and it makes me less likely to be a lower or a higher 6, because I lost it. It was a path I had there, and I relate to.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you're a high 1, it's typical to see a low 6. But the opposite, the inverse, is not true. To see a high 6, you wouldn't necessarily see a low 1. You might see a high 6 with a high 1, because they see that, oh, if I do things perfectly, I get more security. But like I said, if you see a high 6, chances are they've given over a part of themselves to this organization. So they don't know themselves. They don't really give a shit about being a conformist. They're quite happy to hand over their personal identity and their personal feelings in exchange for security. So you'd see a high 6 with a low 4. But in your case, the idea is that helping others is not about feeling your own feelings. It's about being sensitive to the feelings of others, right? So Tara is a high 2. She's a core type 2, which means she feels everything that everyone else feels. And so she helps them, but she's not necessarily aware of her own feelings. So her path of growth for her is about getting in touch with what the fuck does she want? What does Tara want? That's her path of growth. You have no problems figuring out what the fuck you want, because you will take it, you will do it. I think one of the biggest things here is perhaps to say that the 6 score is about security and being aware of what security means to other people that you're trying to serve. But fuck all of that out of the picture and just ask the question of, number one, how do we get out of your head about being a good boy and understanding that you are already.
I'm already a good boy.